Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
One Piece Randomizer by Gray Ninja 27i. An ordinary boy dies and is reincarnated into the body of none other than Monkey D. Luffy, equipped with a randomizer system. What he doesn't realize is that this system doesn't just influence his life, it influences the entire world around him. The warlord of my channeler, What If Lord, Black Money Young Leon, Garrick Russell, Ben Brownlee, Case Clark, Tristan Ward, KSG, PL4YZ, Brian McKenzie. Join the channel membership if you will like to support the channel. Adios.
Unexpected bonding featuring Kuina, Raphael. System. 2 days had passed since the Straw Hats left Gold Island behind. They were now on their way to the famous Barati restaurant, eager to try the most highly praised meals in all of East Blue. Luffy, however, wasn't holding his breath when it came to finding Sanji there. His past experiences in this world had taught him one crucial lesson. Expect the unexpected. Things rarely played out the way he remembered from his past life, so rather than making assumptions, he decided to just go with the flow and deal with whatever situation awaited them. On board the ship, everyone was busy with their own tasks, except for Luffy, who sat perched in the crow's nest, arms crossed and a slight frown tugging at his lips. I didn't get any achievements this time. Strange, he mused, leaning back. Wasn't defeating Eldorago and finding the truth about Wunan's treasure worth anything at all? It wasn't that he was obsessed with rewards, but he had started noticing a pattern. Achievements usually popped up after major battles or significant discoveries. But this time, nothing. Not even a measly reward of a few hundred points. Unable to figure out the answer himself, he decided to consult his ever-reliable companion. Raphael, what do you think? Answer. I cannot provide a definitive answer, as I do not fully understand how the master system operates. However, it is possible that the right conditions for triggering achievements and rewards have not yet been met. Luffy hummed in thought. So the conditions aren't met yet, huh? He mulled it over for a few seconds before shrugging. Oh well. If it triggers, great. If not, I'm not gonna stress over it. There was no point in dwelling on things he couldn't control. Shaking off the thought, he suddenly pushed off from the crow's nest and plummeted toward the deck, landing right beside Kaya with a solid thud. Age, Kaya yelped, nearly dropping the book she had been reading. She clutched her chest, eyes wide. Luffy, could you not do that? Luffy merely grinned. Nope. Then, cupping his hands around his mouth, he called out, all right, Zoro, Kaya, Kuina. Get your butts on deck, it's time for training. Meanwhile, back on Gold Island, a small floating shop boat gently rocked as it docked along the quiet shore. Stepping onto the island was an old traveling Odin chef, Gonzo, accompanied by his impatient grandson, Tobio. Hey, old man. What is this place? Why'd you bring me here? Tobio huffed, crossing his arms. He had no interest in wasting time on some nameless island. He wanted to keep searching for the legendary pirate Wunan's treasure. Just shut up and walk, Gonzo grumbled, grabbing the boy's arm and dragging him along. Truthfully, he had never intended to return here, never thought he would. Yet, for the past 2 days, an unshakable pull had gnawed at him, a strange instinct urging him back to this place. He didn't understand it, but the feeling refused to fade, and so, unwilling to ignore it, and unwilling to leave Tobio behind, he set sail for Gold Island. As they ventured deeper into the island, they noticed clear signs of battle, scorched earth, broken trees, and deep gouges in the ground. A sense of unease crept into Gonzo's heart, quickening his pace. Soon, they arrived at a familiar small hill, a place where his and his best friend's lives had taken drastically different paths. But nothing could have prepared him for what awaited them there. Gonzo stopped in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. In front of him stood several large carved stones, their surfaces etched with words. A fresh grave rested before them, a tattered pirate flag marking its head. Tobio, oblivious to his grandfather's shock, stepped forward and began reading the inscriptions aloud. As he reached the end, his expression twisted with disbelief, his hands clenched into fists. No, "This can't be true," he shouted, whirling around to glare at the stones. "Those pirates must be lying. They probably stole all the treasure and made up this stupid story." His furious rant came to an abrupt halt when he turned and saw his grandfather kneeling before the grave, silent tears streaking his weathered face. "Grandpa?" Tobio's anger melted into concern as he rushed to Gonzo's side. "What's wrong?" For a long moment, Gonzo didn't speak. He simply stared at the grave, as if searching for something. Perhaps an answer, perhaps a memory. Then, with a deep, shuddering breath, he wiped his tears and slowly rose to his feet. "Tobio." His voice was quiet, yet firm. "I don't think the Straw Hat Pirates were lying." Tobio opened his mouth to protest, but Gonzo raised a hand, stopping him. "Listen to me," he said, his gaze never leaving Wunen's resting place. "There's a story you need to hear, one that will help you understand." And so, with a heavy heart, Gonzo began to tell Tobio a story from his own childhood, one he had never spoken of in such detail before. He admitted that Wunen had been his closest friend, inseparable from the moment they could walk. But while they had once shared everything, their dreams had always been different. Wunen had never been content with their simple village life. He scoffed at Gonzo's small ambitions, especially his love for making Odin, dismissing it as pointless when there was gold to be sought and glory to be claimed. In return, Gonzo had always stood firm, countering Wunen's obsession with the same words. "Gold doesn't laugh, doesn't sing, doesn't drink, doesn't cry. It's no different from a rock." But Wunen never listened, and the more they argued, the more their friendship cracked under the weight of their opposing beliefs. Eventually, the tension between them reached a breaking point. Wunen declared his intentions to become a pirate, crafting his own flag and holding a ceremony on a high cliff, demanding Gonzo's loyalty. But Gonzo refused. He couldn't follow a dream that placed gold above all else. That day, for the first time, the two best friends came to blows. Their fists spoke where words had failed, years of frustration and unspoken feelings pouring out in a whirlwind of punches and shouts. The fight ended when they both tumbled over the cliff's edge. Wunen barely managed to catch his flag on a stray branch, his grip trembling as he dangled above the jagged rocks below. Gonzo, however, saw the truth in an instant. The branch wouldn't hold them both. Without hesitation, he made a choice. He let go. For a split second, he saw Wunen's face contort with shock and horror. Then, the wind roared in his ears as he plummeted toward the sea. Miraculously, he survived the fall, but by the time he had recovered, Wunen was gone, never to return. The years passed, and their paths diverged. Wunen became a pirate of unimaginable wealth, amassing enough gold to become a legend. Gonzo, on the other hand, had no regrets. He had followed his own dream, traveling the world in his Odin boat, bringing warmth and comfort to those in need. Yet, even after all these years, a small part of him had always wondered, if fate ever brought them together again, would Wunen still sneer at his Odin, or would he finally sit down and share a meal with his old friend? That question had driven him to the Isle of Gold. He had come here hoping, just maybe, to share one last pot of Odin with an older, wiser Wunen. But instead, he had found a grave. Gonzo let out a weary sigh, wiping a stray tear from his cheek. "And here I am today," he murmured, "standing in front of my best friend's resting place." He took a deep breath, steadying his voice. "But at least now, I know. Even after all this time, our friendship still meant something to him." A faint smile ghosted his lips as he gazed at the tattered pirate flag planted at the head of the grave. Just then, he felt something wrap around him. Looking down, he saw Tobio, arms clinging tightly to his waist, his small frame trembling. His face was buried in Gonzo's stomach, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He was crying. Nothing, it was clear the story, and the truth behind Wunen's legend, had struck him deeply. Gonzo's heart ached at the sight, but he simply placed a hand on his grandson's head, ruffling his hair gently. At that moment, he made a silent vow. No matter what path Tobio chose in life, he would be there. He would support him, guide him, and stand by his side, just as he once wished he could have done for Wunen. After spending a long, quiet moment at his friend's grave, Gonzo finally turned to leave. He took one last look at the stones, the carvings left behind by the Straw Hat Pirates. They had uncovered the truth behind his friend's final memory. They had honored Wunan. For that, he was grateful. As he stepped onto his boat and set sail, he knew one thing for certain. This was his last visit to Gold Island. From here on, he would find a peaceful place to open a shop. A place where he could cook, laugh, and watch over his grandson as he chased his own dreams. This time, he would make sure that no dream was ever left behind. Meanwhile, back with the Straw Hat Pirates, the night stretched on, silent and peaceful except for the gentle lapping of waves against the ship's hull. Only two figures remained awake, standing watch beneath the canopy of stars. "Hey, Kuina," Luffy suddenly spoke, breaking the comfortable silence. "Do you ever wonder what you'd be doing right now if you hadn't chosen this path?" It was a simple question, meant to keep him awake during his shift, but the answer he received was anything but simple. "Probably dead," Kuina said flatly. Luffy whipped his head toward her so fast he nearly gave himself whiplash. "What?" Kuina let out a humorless chuckle at his reaction, shaking her head. "I'm not joking," she added, her voice quieter this time. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "I was 11 when my father told me it was only a matter of time before Zoro surpassed me. That no matter how talented or naturally gifted I was, a man would always be stronger in the end." Luffy frowned but didn't interrupt, sensing she had more to say. "After that, I was furious, heartbroken. I felt helpless. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and it messed with my head." She exhaled slowly, her hands clenching at her sides. "And then, in that state of mind, Zoro challenged me again, and I lost." She let out a dry laugh, her gaze turning distant, lost in memories. "My 11-year-old self took it as proof. Proof that my father was right. That my dream of becoming the world's greatest swordswoman was nothing more than a fantasy. And in that grief and darkness, I decided I didn't want to keep going." Luffy's eyes widened, his breath hitched and his chest tightened, but he stayed silent, letting her speak at her own pace. But then, Kuina continued, a small, almost amused smile ghosting her lips. "A swordsman who was visiting our village forced me to change my mind." She turned toward Luffy, her dark eyes gleaming with something unreadable. "Can you guess who it was?" Luffy tilted his head, thinking for a moment before grinning and joked. "Let me guess, the strongest swordsman in the world. Dracule, Hawkeyes, Mihawk?" His grin faltered when he saw the look on her face. "No fucking way. Are you serious?" he blurted out, eyes wide in shock. Kuina chuckled. "Yeah, it was him. He wasn't the strongest swordsman yet, but he was already a famous marine hunter. His name was known all over the world. One day, he came to our village to challenge my father. Apparently, he had learned about our lineage and roots in Wano from who knows where." She leaned back against the railing, gazing up at the night sky. "So there I was, a heartbroken, suicidal 11-year-old girl, standing face to face with the man who would one day become the world's greatest swordsman. And in that moment, I asked him the same question I had asked my father." Luffy didn't say a word, just listening intently. "You know what he said?" Kuina's lips curled slightly, her voice taking on a dry, amused edge. "He told me, if you're asking something so foolish and pointless, then you've already lost the spirit to become a true master of the sword. From now on, your dream is nothing more than a child's babbling." She smirked. And then, he just walked away, like he hadn't just crushed a little girl's spirit. Luffy winced. "Damn. That's harsh." "Oh, it was," Kuina agreed. "But it had an effect." "Oh, it definitely did." Her fingers drummed lightly against the wood of the deck as a flicker of old fire ignited in her eyes. "That day, all the self-pity and helplessness vanished from my heart, replaced by rage, and a vindictive desire to prove everyone who doubted me wrong. An intense need to make a name for myself in a world filled with strong men." She let out a small laugh. "That same vindictive streak made me take a vow to never touch a sword again, just to piss off my father." Luffy snorted. "Bet that drove him crazy." "You have no idea," Kuina said with a smirk. "Nothing felt better than seeing his sour expression every time he realized I meant it." Her smirk faded, replaced by something softer, something more vulnerable. "And that's how I became the person you see now. A brash, cynical, tomboyish girl who doesn't know a damn thing about jewelry or pretty dresses, but can tell the difference between a cut made by a dagger or a spear just by looking at it." She exhaled. her gaze dropping to the deck with a sad smile. Before she could say anything else, Luffy suddenly moved, appearing beside her in an instant. Before she could react, he pulled her into a firm side hug, his warmth radiating against her. She stiffened, caught off guard, but after a moment, she let herself relax, resting her head against his shoulder. "You know, Kuina," Luffy said with a grin, "if we weren't friends and I just saw you walking past me on the street, I'd probably stop and turn around for a second look." Kuina scoffed, a small chuckle escaping her lips as she lightly punched his stomach. "Dumbass." But seriously, Luffy continued, his voice softer now, more sincere. "I'm glad you're here. It would have been a shame to miss out on a friend like you." Kuina turned away quickly, not wanting him to see the moisture in her eyes. "Thanks," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, abruptly, she stood up, clearing her throat. "I'm gonna freshen up. Be back in a minute," she said hastily before striding toward the bathroom. Luffy just smiled, watching her go, shaking his head knowingly. He didn't need to say anything else, he already understood. Just after Kuina left, a familiar notification sound rang in Luffy's head. "Oh, the rewards are here," he thought excitedly, a grin spreading across his face as he quickly pulled up his system interface. "Congratulations. Side quest. One Piece the movie was completed. Reward. Upgrade token X1, congratulations. 2 new achievements unlocked. Conquering avarice. The achievement is given to the individual who has defeated an extremely greedy pirate Eldorado. Reward. 1000 PTS. The Wunan's Legacy. The achievement is given to the individual who has uncovered the truth behind the rumors of the legendary treasure of the Great Gold Pirate, Wunan. Reward. 1000 PTS. Luffy grinned, scanning through the notifications. An upgrade token, huh? He mused, recalling the last time he had used one on Raphael. The results had been impressive, to say the least. Since I upgraded Raphael before, let's try using it on the system this time. What do you think, Raphael? Answer. I have no objections. It would be wise to observe the effects of the upgrade token on the system, providing us with more data on both the token and the system itself. Luffy nodded. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Alright then, let's do this. Without hesitation, he activated the token. Congratulations, upgrade token has been used to enhance the randomizer system. Congratulations. The randomizer system has been successfully overhauled. Moving forward, achievements and titomizer rolls instead of points. Additionally, rewards obtained from achievements and titles will be doubled. Notice. 2 unclaimed achievements have been detected. Notice. The rewards for the unclaimed achievements have been adjusted according to the new system configuration. Congratulations. Randomizer roll X4 has been awarded to the user. Luffy stared at the notifications, blinking. Then, a wide grin stretched across his face. Whoa. That's a hell of an upgrade, he muttered. Achievement hunting is gonna be way more fun from now on. Eager to test out his luck, he immediately initiated the first roll. The result? An ordinary item from his world. Luffy scratched his head. Alright, not bad, but let's go again. He activated the second roll, only to get another mundane item. He groaned. Yeah, as Miss Guide told me, the randomizer system really is both a blessing and a curse. Shaking off his mild disappointment, he moved on to the third roll. The moment the notification popped up, his eyes widened in pure excitement. Congratulations. Iron Man Gauntlet X1 watch received. Luffy practically jumped. No freaking way. He didn't even wait. He immediately summoned the watch from his inventory, strapping it onto his wrist with eager hands. The sleek design alone was enough to make his inner fanboy scream. But then he pressed the face of the watch, and with a satisfying click, the device came to life, expanding and shifting, covering his entire palm with a sleek, metallic red and gold gauntlet. Luffy let out a giddy laugh. This is fucking awesome. He flexed his fingers, watching the gauntlet respond flawlessly to his movements. He tested its grip, the articulation, even mimicking some of Iron Man's iconic poses. For the next few minutes, he played around with it like an excited kid, enjoying every second. Then, finally, he calmed himself down, taking a deep breath. Alright. Last roll. Let's see what else I get. He initiated the fourth and final roll and once again was left with his mouth wide open. "Wait, no way," he said, staring at the screen with wide eyes. "Congratulations. Polearm. Ascended skyward spine X1 received. To be continued. Ravaged restaurant, Raphael. Raphael. System. Wow, it's already been 7 months, huh?" Luffy mused, stretching lazily across the deck of the Going Merry. The salty breeze ruffled his hair as he gazed up at the sky, hands resting behind his head. Around him, the rest of the crew was deeply engrossed in their game of Uno. Except for Zoro, who remained perched in the crow's nest, keeping a watchful eye on the endless blue horizon. "Yeah, time sure flies," Uta agreed, a small smile tugging at her lips. That smile, however, vanished the moment she turned to glare at Kuina, who had just dropped yet another +2 onto the growing pile. "Can you stop doing that? I already have enough cards?" Uta groaned, dramatically clutching her ever-growing stack like a tragic heroine. Kuina smirked, resting her chin on her hand as she watched Uta groan and pick up 2 more cards. "Not my fault you keep sitting to my right," she teased. "Maybe you should rethink your strategy." "Rethink my? You think I planned to sit here just so you could bully me?" Uta huffed, her expression somewhere between exasperation and despair. Luffy, down to his final card, blinked between the two before breaking into a grin. "You guys sure get mad over a game." Kaya, ever the voice of reason, giggled as she gently placed a yellow 4 onto the pile. "Well, it is a game of luck and betrayal." "You mean suffering," Uta muttered darkly, her eyes full of quiet resignation. Luffy, unfazed, slapped his last card down with a victorious grin. "I win." A beat of silence fell over the group. Kuina narrowed her eyes. "Did you say Uno before that?" Luffy blinked. "Huh? Uno?" Uta, still reeling from her repeated punishment, immediately sat up straight. "You didn't say it, did you? That means you gotta draw 4 cards. Kuina leaned back, arms crossed. "Rules are rules, Captain. Pick up 4. Kaya nodded apologetically. "It is the rule, Luffy." Luffy stared at the deck in betrayal. "I introduced them to this game, and I'm the one who forgot to say Uno. How humiliating." With a defeated sigh, he snatched 4 cards from the pile and inspected them with the air of a man who had been personally wronged. "Man, this game is weird." Uta, now reinvigorated, slammed down a reverse card with a wicked grin. "Alright, time for payback." Kuina smirked. "You're still going to lose." Before Uta could retaliate, Zoro's voice suddenly cut through the air. "Oi! We're here, but you guys need to see this." The playful atmosphere shifted in an instant. Without hesitation, Zoro leapt down from the crow's nest, landing smoothly near them. His expression was unreadable as he handed Luffy a pair of binoculars. Luffy took them and peered through, his grin fading the moment his eyes locked onto their destination. The Barati. Or at least, what was left of it. The once proud floating restaurant was barely recognizable. The top 3 floors had been completely obliterated, jagged holes and shattered windows marred the remains, while thick plumes of smoke curled ominously into the sky. Luffy lowered the binoculars, his jaw tightening. Did Don Krieg already attack the restaurant, or is this something else entirely? As the Going Merry continued its steady approach, the carefree game of Uno was long forgotten. The Going Merry pulled up alongside the Barati, the thick scent of smoke and seawater heavy in the air. Now that they were closer, the true extent of the devastation became painfully clear. What had once been a lively floating restaurant was now a battered husk. Wooden beams lay splintered, sections of the deck were charred black, and what little remained of the top floors looked ready to collapse at any moment. The once proud vessel barely clung to the waves, as if struggling to stay afloat. But the worst part wasn't the wreckage, it was the bodies. Dozens of chefs were sprawled across the ruined deck, some unconscious, others groaning in pain. Their uniforms, once pristine, were now tattered and stained with blood. A few twitched weakly, barely clinging to consciousness. Luffy's jaw tightened as he surveyed the destruction. His usual carefree demeanor had vanished, replaced by quiet intensity. "What the hell happened here?" he muttered. Before anyone could step forward to help, movement from the wreckage drew their attention. 2 figures staggered into view. Patty and Carne, chefs of the Barati, looked like they had been through hell. Their once white uniforms were shredded and smeared with blood. Bruises marred their skin, and despite the obvious strain in their battered bodies, they clutched large kitchen knives with shaking hands. Their eyes were wild, filled with both exhaustion and fury. "Step back," Patty barked, his grip tightening around the handle of his knife. "We won't let anyone finish what those bastards started." Carne, barely able to stand, gritted his teeth. "If you came to take what's left, you'll have to go through us first." Uta immediately raised her hands in a calming gesture. Whoa, relax. We just got here. We're not your enemies." Kaya, her face pale with concern, took a hesitant step forward. "You're hurt. Please, let us help." "Help?" Patty spat, eyes burning with anger and betrayal. "You think we're gonna trust your kind ever again?" Luffy exhaled slowly, folding his arms. "Take a good look at our ship," he said, his voice even but firm. "Do you see a pirate flag?" Patty and Carne hesitated, their eyes flickering to the Going Merry. "Besides," Luffy continued, "are you really gonna waste time pointing knives at us while your friends are lying here bleeding?" His gaze was steady, unwavering. "Let us help them." Silence hung between them, thick with tension. Patty and Carne exchanged wary glances. For a moment, it seemed like they might refuse. Then, finally, Patty exhaled sharply and lowered his knife. Carne followed, though he still looked ready to collapse. "TCH, fine," Carne muttered, his voice hoarse. "But if any of you try anything funny, I'll gut you like a fish." "Good," Luffy said, already turning to his crew. "Zoro, Kuina, pull the injured out of the wreckage and bring them here. Uta, Kaya, and I will start treating their wounds." Kaya hesitated, tugging at Luffy's sleeve. "What about my powers? I could heal them faster, right?" Luffy sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Yes, you could. But like I've told you a million times, be mindful of the drawbacks." His expression softened as he placed a hand on her shoulder. "If we can handle the basic treatment first and reduce the strain on you, then that's what we're gonna do." Without wasting another second, the crew sprang into action. Zoro and Kuina moved swiftly, pulling wounded chefs from the wreckage and laying them on a relatively stable part of the deck. Uta rushed to retrieve the first aid kit from the Going Merry, while Luffy and Kaya got to work assessing the injured. Some could be treated with basic care, bandages, disinfectants, and a steady hand. Others were in far worse shape. Kaya knelt beside a chef with a deep gash along his side, her hands trembling slightly. "This one needs immediate attention," she murmured. I don't know if he'll last without stronger treatment." Luffy glanced at Kaya. "All right. We'll stabilize as many as we can, but for the ones who need more, we'll use your powers when it is really needed." Meanwhile, despite their own injuries, Patty and Carne refused to stay idle. Gritting their teeth against the pain, they quickly joined Zoro and Kuina, helping to pull their fellow chefs from the wreckage. Suddenly, Patty let out a sharp shout. "Carne, get over here, quick! I found the captain." Carne's head snapped up, and without hesitation, he rushed to his friend's side. Together, they heaved away the broken debris, revealing Zeph pinned beneath the wreckage. The old chef was barely conscious, his face pale and covered in soot, his clothes torn and bloodied. "Boss!" Patty's voice cracked with desperation as they carefully lifted Zeph. "Hang in there." They wasted over to Luffy and the others. "Boss, treat the captain first. He's worse off than any of us," Patty pleaded, carefully laying Zeph in front of Luffy. Luffy nodded and crouched down, assessing Zeph's injuries. The old chef was in bad shape, deep gashes, bruises, and burns covered the old chef's body. His peg leg was missing, ripped away at some point, but that wasn't what made Luffy frown. Something was off. An odd scent clung to Zeph and the wreckage, a distinct, buttery smell. Luffy's nose twitched. Butter? His brows furrowed, but he pushed the thought aside. Now wasn't the time. He turned to Uta, already reaching for the first aid kit. "Let's patch him up as much as we can." They worked fast, hands moving with precision. Cleaning wounds, stopping the bleeding, wrapping bandages, doing everything possible to stabilize him. But it didn't take long for reality to set in. Zeph's injuries were too severe. Realizing they had no other option, Luffy turned to Kaya and glanced up at her. "Kaya, we need your power." Kaya nodded, taking a deep breath. Spreading her wings, she raised her palm. Mystical fire, she whispered. The air shimmered as golden flames bloomed from her palm, flowing over Zeph's body. The fire wrapped around him, not burning, but healing. His wounds began to close, his bruises fading away like melting ice. "Oi! What the hell are you doing?" Patty and Carnate panicked the moment the fire touched their captain. Their instincts screamed danger. They surged forward, ready to shove Kaya away. But Luffy grabbed them both by the collars and yanked them back. "Calm down." His voice was firm, unwavering. "She's helping him." Patty and Carnate froze, exchanging nervous glances before turning back to the scene before them. Their hands clenched into fists as they stood helplessly, watching the flames engulf their captain. Moments later, the golden fire retracted back into Kaya's arm. When the flames disappeared, Zeph lay there, completely healed. Not a single wound remained. Patty and Carnate stared, their eyes wide with disbelief. "Told you," Luffy smirked before ignoring their dumbstruck expressions. He grabbed a nearby chair and helped Kaya sit down. Her chest rose and fell in heavy breaths, beads of sweat forming on her forehead. A clear sign of how much damage Zeph had taken. "Kaya, you okay?" Luffy asked, retrieving a bottle of water from his inventory and handing it to her. "Looks like Zeph had more damage than we thought." "Yeah, there were a lot of internal injuries," Kaya admitted between breaths. She took a sip of water before adding, "And since I still can't control my power very well, I accidentally healed some of his old wounds too." "I see," Luffy said, and unconsciously his eyes went towards Zeph's right leg, but he found that the part below his knee was still missing. So, even the power of Anjuwaman cannot regrow lost limbs, or is it that Kaya lacks sufficient power or control that it didn't happen with Zeph? Something to look further into, I guess. Carnate swallowed nervously, his gaze lingering on Zeph's unconscious form. "Young lady, will the captain be alright?" Kaya offered him a reassuring smile. "Give him a few hours, he'll be up." A heavy sigh of relief passed through Patty and Carnate. Without hesitation, they both bowed deeply. "Thank you. You saved his life." Kaya shifted uncomfortably, unused to such direct gratitude. She cast a quick glance at Luffy and Uda, silently pleading for help. Luffy clapped his hands together, redirecting the conversation. "All right, is that everyone?" His sharp gaze swept over the unconscious chefs that Zoro and Kuina had pulled from the wreckage. Patty hesitated, his fingers tightening into fists. "Yeah, that should be all of us." His voice was thick with frustration, his jaw clenching as he looked at his fallen comrades. "Damn it, if only we were strong enough. We couldn't even protect one of our own from being taken away." Uda frowned. "What do you mean?" Before she could finish, Zoro and Kuina approached, carrying an unconscious figure between them. "Luffy," Zoro called as he stepped forward. "We found this girl outside, passed out in one of the boats." Gently, he laid the pink-haired girl onto the deck near the other wounded. Even in her battered state, her vibrant hair and strange attire stood out sharply against the soot-stained surroundings. Uda studied the girl, her brow furrowing. She turned to Patty and Carnate. "Is she one of yours?" Patty's expression darkened. His jaw tightened, eyes burning with fury. "No, but..." His fists trembled. "She's wearing the same kind of colorful attire as those bastards who attacked us." "So she's the enemy?" Uda asked, her gaze flicking to the unconscious, pink-haired girl. "No, she's not." Luffy's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. All eyes snapped to him. Ignoring their stares, he turned straight to Kaya. "Kaya, treat her. Her condition is second only to Zeph's." Kaya hesitated for only a second before nodding, trusting his judgment. Without another word, she knelt beside the girl and began tending to her wounds. Uda crossed her arms. "And how exactly do you know she's not with the enemy?" Luffy exhaled sharply and glanced at Patty. "First of all, sorry chief, but whoever attacked this place isn't our enemy." His voice carried an unmistakable weight. His eyes sharpened as he looked at his crew. "We help people because it's the right thing to do. But that doesn't mean we should go taking stray arrows for others. Especially not this early in our journey. One monster-level opponent could wipe us out like a twig." Luffy warned Uda and the rest of his crew, knowing who was very likely behind this whole attack. He didn't want them to think that just because they were at the top of the power hierarchy in East Blue, They were invincible enough to pick any fight they wanted. Especially since this world was quite unpredictable compared to the One Piece world he knew. And second, this girl here is a princess and sister of the boy for whom this entire attack happened in the first place, Luffy said, and walked forward, stopping right in front of the pink-haired girl. This girl here is none other than Vinsmoke Reiju, the eldest and only daughter of Vinsmoke Judge, the king of the Germa kingdom. To be continued. A furious chef and depressed sister. Raphael. System. When Zeph opened his eyes again, a dull ache radiated through his body, the stiffness in his limbs reminding him that he'd been out for a while. His mind was still foggy, but the moment he recalled the attack on his restaurant, panic shot through his chest like a jolt of electricity. His instincts screamed at him to get up, to check on his crew, to make sure they were safe. But before he could even push himself upright, two figures suddenly threw themselves onto him, wailing like children. "Captain, you're all right." Patty and Carnate clung to him, their faces buried in his clothes, smearing tears and snot all over him in their emotional outburst. Zeph's eyebrow twitched, and a vein bulged on his forehead as he looked down at the absolute mess they were making. "Get off me, you morons," he barked, grabbing both of them by the heads and roughly shoving them aside. The two landed in an undignified heap, but their relieved smiles never faded. As Zeph swung his legs over the side of the bed to stand, he suddenly realized his peg leg was missing, leaving him visibly frustrated. "Oye, Patty, get me my spare leg," he ordered, his voice carrying its usual authoritative bite. As he waited, his sharp eyes swept across the room, finally landing on a group of unfamiliar faces seated at one of the restaurant's battered tables, eating what looked like food made by his chefs. His frown deepened. "Who the hell are these people?" Zeph demanded, glancing at Carnate. Carnate quickly straightened up, wiping his face before launching into an explanation. He detailed how the strangers, Luffy and his crew, had helped them tend to the wounded and used mysterious powers to heal him, who had looked quite bad an hour ago. As the cook spoke, Patty returned with the spare peg leg, kneeling to help Zeph attach it. By the time Carnate finished his account, Zeph was silent, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he pushed himself up, adjusting his balance before striding toward the table where Luffy sat. Without hesitation, the old chef bent forward in a respectful bow. "Thank you," he said gruffly, his voice laced with sincerity, "for helping me and my crew." Luffy paused mid-bite, chewing thoughtfully before grinning. "No problem, old man. It'd be a real shame to lose a restaurant that serves food this good." Zeph let out a scoff of amusement, shaking his head at the simple yet genuine response. "Anyway," Luffy continued, leaning back slightly as he glanced around the wrecked dining hall, "what exactly happened here? Judging by all this destruction, whoever attacked must have been strong and vicious, not unusual for these seas. But since they left you all alive, it doesn't seem like the attack was aimed at you." His gaze sharpened. "So, who were they after?" A dark shadow passed over Zeph's face. His jaw tightened, and his fists curled at his sides. "You're right," he admitted, his voice heavy with restrained fury. "The attack wasn't meant for me. It was for one of my chefs, Sanji." His knuckles whitened as he clenched his fists tighter. It was just another normal day. Customers were eating, drinks were flowing, then suddenly, Zeph's voice faltered for a moment, his eyes burning with undisguised rage, as he began recounting the attack. A few hours ago, the Barati bustled with its usual liveliness, the clash of plates, the murmur of satisfied customers, and the occasional bellowing argument between chefs forming a symphony of controlled chaos. But in the next instant, that harmony was shattered. The first explosion rocked the floating restaurant, sending dishes flying and patrons screaming. The force rattled the very foundations of the ship, splintering wood and upending tables. Before anyone could process what was happening, a second blast tore through the entrance, blowing the heavy restaurant doors clean off their hinges. As the smoke cleared, three towering figures emerged, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sky. The first was a woman of average height with pale skin, shoulder-length fuchsia hair curling at the ends, and bangs obscuring the right side of her face. Thick lashes framed piercing yellow eyes that gleamed with an unsettling confidence. She wore a short red-violet dress. A long dark purple feather coat draped over her shoulders. magenta gloves that reached her elbows, and 2 arrow-shaped horns protruding from the top of her head. The second was taller and eerily thin, her skin nearly ghostly white. Long, light blue hair curled at the tips, swaying gently as she exhaled a wisp of smoke from the cigarette perched between her lips while a cold, melancholic expression rested on her face. She wore hooped earrings, a vertically striped light blue dress, and a red sash tied neatly around her waist. The last was an enormous man, broad-shouldered and towering over everyone. His proportionally small shaved head had short blonde hair, and his face bore wrinkles and a small mustache. A heavy dark blue coat draped over his frame, with oversized blue and white striped shoulder pads lined with fur. A yellow cape hung from his shoulders, orange gloves covered his hands, and thick boots of the same shade completed his outfit. A thick belt adorned with a genie's lamp emblem rested on his waist, matching the golden hoops in his ears. They were none other than Charlotte Galette, Charlotte Amand, and Charlotte Daifuku, children of the Emperor Big Mom and high-ranking officers of the Big Mom Pirates. A heavy silence fell over the Barati. The customers, still trapped in shock, barely dared to breathe. The chefs tensed, hands tightening around whatever kitchen tools they could grasp. Galette took a step forward, her golden eyes scanning the room like a predator surveying its prey. She raised a single hand, palm facing downward. A thick, golden substance oozed from her skin, flowing like melted wax before solidifying into a sickly smooth tide across the restaurant floor. The butter spread rapidly, ensnaring tables, chairs, and the legs of terrified patrons. The lower-ranked chefs struggled against its grasp, but the more they moved, the faster they sank. Galette's lips curled into a knowing smirk. "We're here for the boy named Sanji," she declared, her voice honeyed yet leaving no room for negotiation. Beside her, Daifuku rubbed his belly lazily, a smirk playing on his lips as a massive figure materialized behind him. A towering, muscular genie loomed over the room, its wickedly curved halberd catching the light ominously. "Make this easy," Daifuku rumbled, his voice laced with amusement, "and we won't have to break too many bones." Zeph had been behind the counter when the first explosion hit, instincts kicking in before his mind could even process the danger. The moment the doors blew open, he moved, vaulting over the bar and planting himself between the intruders and his crew. His stance was solid despite his age, his eyes sharp and unwavering. "You want my chef?" Zeph's voice cut through the tension like a honed blade. "You'll have to go through me first." For the first time, Amand moved. Her cigarette smoldered between her fingers as she let out a slow, almost regretful sigh. "Very well," she murmured, the words barely louder than a whisper. With a single fluid motion, she drew her nodashi. The massive blade hummed as it left its scabbard, the faintest shimmer of light reflecting off its razor-sharp edge. Zeph didn't wait. Launching himself forward, he swung his peg leg in a brutal arc, aiming for Galette's ribs. She reacted swiftly, conjuring a thick barrier of butter in an instant. Zeph's strike hit with incredible force, splattering the substance outward, but the impact slowed him just enough. Just enough for the genie to strike. The massive apparition swung its halberd in a deadly arc. Zeph twisted midair, barely dodging the strike as he landed atop a table. With a powerful push, he flipped off it, sending a compressed air kick straight at Daifuku himself. The Big Mom pirate grunted as the attack drew him back several feet, but not nearly enough. Galette took advantage. With a flick of her wrist, her butter snaked around Zeph's peg leg, hardening instantly. Before he could react, the genie attacked again. This time, it hit. The halberd's crushing force sent Zeph hurtling through the restaurant, crashing straight into the bar. Glass shattered around him, bottles raining down as splinters of wood dug into his skin. Pain flared through his ribs, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to stay down. With sheer will, Zeph pushed himself upright. Blood dripped from a gash on his forehead, blurring his vision as he squared his shoulders. "Still standing, old man?" Daifuku chuckled, rolling his shoulders as if loosening up for another round. "Not bad." Zeph spat blood onto the floor. "You brats." His leg trembled slightly, but his glare never wavered. "You think you can just waltz in here and take what you want?" Galette gave a slow, almost pitying shake of her head. "We don't think." Her butter lashed out, tightening around Zeph's arms and legs like iron shackles. "We know." The genie raised its halberd once more. Zeph braced himself. Crack! Agony ripped through his body as the force of the strike sent him flying across the restaurant. The impact was enough to rip his peg leg from his body, the wooden limb clattering uselessly across the floor. He crashed down in a heap, blood trickling from his temple as his vision dimmed. The last thing he registered before darkness swallowed him whole was the panicked screams of his crew. Meanwhile, Amand moved like a ghost among the Barati chefs. Her nodashi whispered through the air in wide, deliberate sweeps, slicing through counters, tables, and walls with terrifying precision. The restaurant's foundation groaned under the onslaught, splinters and debris raining down like falling leaves. The chefs, hardened by years of brawling with unruly customers and pirate riffraff, weren't about to back down. They lunged at her with whatever they could grab: cleavers, knives, even frying pans. But Amand barely seemed to notice. With a flick of her wrist, she sent 2 cooks crashing to the floor, their uniforms shredded as if paper thin. A third came at her in desperation, an overhead swing aiming to cleave straight down. Amand caught his arm mid-motion, her grip firm yet eerily calm. She twisted. A sickening pop filled the air, followed by a strangled scream. "You're outmatched," she stated simply, tossing him aside as if he were nothing. Then came Sanji. The blonde chef launched himself into the fray, his legs slicing through the air in a blistering Rankyaku kick. Amand barely had time to turn, raising her nodashi to intercept. The impact sent a sharp vibration up her arm, her blade singing from the force. Her expression didn't change, but she gave a small nod of acknowledgement. "Ah, the target." Sanji didn't waste a second. He pressed forward, unleashing a rapid barrage of kicks, each one faster and deadlier than the last. Amand weaved between them with near-effortless grace, her sword flashing between his strikes like a silver phantom. She wasn't dodging, she was playing with him. Sanji gritted his teeth. "TCH, you're holding back." Amand tilted her head, her voice calm. "Orders." Sanji's foot rocketed toward her temple, but she caught his leg mid-motion. There was no struggle, no hesitation, just an almost gentle twist. Sanji's balance shattered. He spiraled, his body crashing onto the ruined floorboards. Before he could react, the cool edge of Amand's blade hovered just above his throat. "Ma'ama told us to bring you back, so you're coming with us," she murmured. "Doesn't matter if you want to or not." Sanji's breath was ragged. Pain throbbed in his limbs, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Around him, the Barati lay in ruins. His mentor broken. His crewmates beaten. His fingers clenched into fists. He had no choice. Amand lifted her blade away. "Good boy." Behind her, Galette and Daifuku loomed over Zeph's fallen form. The fight was over. The Barati had lost. The Charlotte family had won, but the night was far from over. Sanji forced himself to his feet, his gaze darkening as he turned toward Zeph. Blood dripped from the old man's forehead, his body motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. But what hurt more, what cut deeper than any blade, was the look in his eyes. Not just pain. Failure. Sanji's chest tightened, a white-hot rage bubbling beneath the surface. He clenched his fists so hard his nails bit into his palms. Before he could move, the cold tip of Daifuku's genie's halberd pressed against his back. "No heroics now," Daifuku chuckled, his tone thick with amusement. "Let's not make this difficult." Amand flicked her blade to rid it of lingering dust. "We leave now." The Big Mom pirates turned, leading their captive toward the docks where their ship awaited. Zeph's fingers twitched. Blood dribbled from the corner of his mouth as he struggled, desperately, to lift his head. His voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. "Sanji, don't go." His consciousness faded, his body went limp. Sanji didn't turn around, didn't let himself look back. He simply walked, each step heavier than the last, his heart a lead-burning sensation in his chest, with the weight of the decision forced upon him. "Damn it, I don't understand. What the hell do those bastards from the Big Mom pirates want with Sanji?" Patty cursed, slamming his fist on the table, his frustration reverberating through the nearly silent room. "Well," Luffy said, finishing the last bite of his meal and wiping his mouth with a napkin, I think it has something to do with who Sanji's father is. Suddenly, a light flashed in Zeph's eyes and his expression darkened instantly as he remembered a conversation he had with Sanji when he first took him in. His fists clenched as he muttered through gritted teeth, "Judge, that bastard." Patty and Carne exchanged uneasy glances. Luffy had mentioned something about this before, but hearing Zeph react like that made it clear. This wasn't just some distant, unimportant detail. "Yep," Luffy continued, popping a dessert into his mouth like it was just another casual discussion. "The Germa Kingdom is near Big Mom's territory, so I think there must be some kind of deal between Judge and Big Mom. And based on what I know about her, it's probably got something to do with appeasing her in some way or form." Quite the guess, an unfamiliar voice interrupted, smooth yet slightly strained, "And I'm afraid you're not far from the truth." Everyone turned toward the voice. The pink-haired woman Zoro had found earlier walked toward them, her expression carefully neutral, though the tension in her shoulders betrayed her exhaustion. "My name is Reiju, Sanji's older sister," she introduced herself, pausing as she took in the wary expressions around her. "And it was my father who sent the Big Mom pirates to retrieve my brother." Uda folded her arms across her chest, her sharp eyes scanning Reiju with suspicion. "And how do you fit into all of this?" she asked. "Were you sent as an overseer to make sure they completed the mission?" Reiju scoffed, a helpless smile tugging at her lips. "As if father would ever trust a failure like me with something that important." Luffy raised a brow, question marks practically popping up over his head. "A failure?" he thought to himself. "I snuck onto the Big Mom pirates' ship when they visited my father for Sanji's location," she admitted. "I wanted to stop them from taking him, but I couldn't even withstand a single attack from a man. She cut through me like I was nothing." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Truly, a failure." Kuina frowned, watching her carefully. "And they left you alive?" she questioned. "That sounds strange, doesn't it?" Reiju let out a bitter chuckle, shaking her head. "It was Sanji who saved me," she admitted, her voice softer now. "Before I passed out, I heard him threaten them, said if they didn't leave me behind, he'd take a loud hard. And that was something they couldn't afford." She exhaled shakily, brushing a hand through her hair. "Not that it really matters," she murmured. "I have a tracking chip inside me, just like the one they used to find Sanji in the first place. No matter where I go, my father will always find me." Luffy smirked and reached into his pocket, pulling out a tiny, gleaming microchip. "Oh, you mean this?" Reiju's eyes widened in shock. "Found it in your neck while we were treating you," Luffy said casually. "A quick cut, and it was out before Kaya even finished healing you." Upon hearing his words, Reiju blanked for a moment before relief flooded over her. She fell to the ground, sobbing her eyes out. "Thank you," she said between her sobs. She knew that she couldn't express in words how thankful she was to be freed from her father's control. Although a part of her felt guilty that it came at the cost of her brother's freedom, at the moment, she was too overwhelmed to care. Meanwhile, Luffy, who was staring at the crying girl, couldn't help but feel that he was missing a lot of context compared to what he knew from before. Especially after seeing the Reiju in front of him, who looked underconfident and untrained, unlike the confident and self-assured girl he knew from the manga. He wanted to know more about her and Sanji, as well as the situation at their home, but he knew that pushing her for information right now wasn't a good idea, so he pushed it to the back of his head and gestured for Kaya to comfort the crying girl. However, just then, a large shadow loomed over the Barati. Hurriedly, Luffy rushed outside and saw a massive ship looming over the restaurant. But then, a smile formed on his face as he saw the Jolly Roger hoisted on the ship. "Oh, Don Krieg is here," Luffy said, as a sinister gleam appeared in his eyes. "Well, it looks like it's time to farm for more achievements." To be continued. Breaking Krieg, Raphael. System. Huh? The ship's still intact. Guess Don Krieg and his crew didn't run into the infamous black paint merchant on their way here. Luffy mused. A quiet chuckle bubbling in his mind as he recalled Mihawk's reputation on Reddit in his past life. But that begs the question, if Mihawk isn't chasing him, then why is he here? Setting that thought aside, he turned toward the floating restaurant. "Hey, Zeph, we've got company." The head chef grunted, stepping out from the kitchen with his usual gruff demeanor. The moment his gaze landed on the massive warship looming outside, his expression soured, and he clicked his tongue in irritation. TCH. Looks like lowlifes are swarming my restaurant today, he muttered, his fist clenching at his side. Hey, I take deep offense to that statement, Luffy said, placing a hand over his chest in mock outrage. Zeph shot him a deadpan stare, unimpressed by the theatrics, before letting out a long-suffering sigh. He then shifted his focus back to the approaching fleet, his sharp eyes scanning the figures moving aboard the ship. Meanwhile, two men leapt from the massive vessel, landing heavily on the Barati's deck. Leading the pair was a broad-shouldered, muscular man with unruly purple-gray hair and distinct sideburns. His golden armor gleamed under the sunlight, contrasting sharply with the deep purple of his pants. To the onlookers, his ostentatious appearance was nothing short of an eyesore. Beside him stood a taller, lanky man with short, scruffy hair and a light stubble shadowing his jawline. He wore a bored yet serious expression and a pair of tonfa rested in his grip, while a double-barreled shotgun hung loosely at his waist, hinting at the kind of fighter he was. This was none other than the infamous pirate of the East Blue, Don Krieg, captain of the Krieg pirates, alongside his ruthless combat commander, Jin the Man-Demon. "Ha! What a dump," Krieg scoffed, spreading his arms wide as if addressing an audience. "I came here expecting to see the great floating restaurant, but from the looks of it, this place is already halfway to the seafloor." Zeph's face remained impassive, but his fingers twitched slightly, a telltale sign of irritation. Patty and Carne, standing behind the old man, bristled at the insult. "You bastard." Krieg didn't even spare them a glance. Instead, he stepped forward, his smirk widening. "You know, I was originally just here to have a taste of the legendary cooking from the famed Red Leg, Zeph," he mused, his voice dripping with mockery. "But seeing the state of things, I think it'd be a waste to just eat here." He chuckled darkly, his eyes narrowing as he tilted his head. "Instead, I've decided on something better." With a casual gesture, he motioned for his right-hand man. Jin stepped forward, resting a tonfa against his shoulder while his sharp gaze remained locked onto Zeph. "Captain Krieg isn't one to let good resources go to waste," he stated simply. Krieg nodded. "That's right, from now on, Barati is mine." A wave of tension rippled through the chefs. "I'll be taking this restaurant under my flag," Krieg continued, his golden armor glinting as he raised his chin. "Along with you, old man. The great red leg Zeph will cook exclusively for my crew." Zeph let out a slow exhale through his nose, his jaw tightening. Luffy blinked. "Huh. That's a new one." He tilted his head, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "You usually just kill everyone and take their ship. Trying a recruitment speech now?" Krieg scowled at him. "Shut it, brat." But Luffy just grinned. "Nah. This is kinda funny. Keep going." Krieg growled, but ultimately ignored him, focusing back on Zeph. "I know you're old and all, but don't be stupid," he sneered. "You don't really have a choice. Your restaurant is wrecked, your staff's a joke. They can't even protect this place. But under my flag, Barati will be safe. Join me, and I'll make sure you and your crew don't starve at the bottom of the ocean." Zeph's eyes darkened. A heavy silence hung over the deck. Then, slowly, the old man took a step forward. His wooden peg leg tapped against the deck as he came face to face with Krieg. His posture was relaxed, his hands still shoved into his pockets. But the air around him shifted. "You done talking, brat?" Zeph asked. His voice was low, dangerous. Krieg's smirk twitched, momentarily faltering. The tension cracked in the air before Luffy suddenly whistled, breaking the heavy silence. All eyes turned toward him as he casually put his hands behind his back and strolled forward. "Old man, I'm sure you're burning with youthful vigor to defend your home, but let me kindly remind you that we just patched you up, so take it slow, will you?" Luffy said, coming to a stop between Zeph and Krieg. He grinned. "Let me handle this in exchange for a dinner made specially by you." Zeph's brow furrowed as he studied the boy. It was one thing for Luffy to heal him and his men out of kindness, but this, standing in the way of Krieg and his forces, that was far too generous for someone who had no stake in this fight. It didn't sit right with him, not after everything he'd seen on the seas. "Why are you helping us? We have nothing to offer you in return," Zeph said plainly. He didn't want a boy like Luffy, someone he saw immense potential in, to throw his life away for nothing. "If I'm being honest, I do have a personal motive," Luffy admitted without hesitation. But we aren't close enough, and I don't feel like explaining it with so many ears around. His expression remained relaxed as he explained. Aside from that, it's good practice for me to use my powers against guys like him. And when word gets out about my victory, I get a nice little boost in reputation. Zeph was silent for a long moment, his sharp gaze locked onto Luffy's back. Then, with a slow exhale, he finally nodded. Very well, young man. I'll put my faith in you. Krieg let out a bark of laughter, his smirk twisting with disbelief. Are you done with your dramatic stupidity? He sneered, crossing his arms. His gaze flicked to Zeph with contempt. You're really putting your faith in some brat? Then his eyes landed on Luffy, narrowing with irritation. And you really think you can take me on? I have 300 men behind me, he said, gesturing toward his ship, where dozens of rough-looking pirates leaned over the railing, watching with cruel amusement. They alone would be enough to deal with a weakling like you. I don't even need to lift a finger. Luffy hummed, glancing at the massive warship. Oh yeah, that reminds me. He tilted his head. Didn't you have a fleet of 50 pirate ships? What happened? Lost them on the way here or something? Krieg's smirk vanished, replaced by an ugly scowl. His face darkened, the veins in his forehead twitching. You talk too much, brat, he growled, voice low and menacing. Then his lips curled into a cruel smirk. You know, he drawled, his eyes gleaming with malice. I saw a few fine-looking women inside the restaurant. Once I'm done with you, maybe I'll claim them too. A sharp, oppressive silence fell over the deck. Luffy's expression didn't change. At least, not at first. But then, his eyes darkened. It was subtle at first, a mere shift in his gaze. Yet, for those paying attention, the air around him grew heavier, colder. Is that so? Luffy said in a low threatening voice before he turned towards Zeph, who was taken aback by the cruelty he saw in the boy's eyes. Tell me, old man, how would you evaluate Krieg and his men as human beings? Zeph hesitated. There was something behind Luffy's question, something deliberate. He wasn't sure what, but he chose his words carefully. I don't think there's a single good thing I could say about them, he admitted, his expression hardening. Pillaging villages, violating women, committing all sorts of vile crimes. Wherever they go, suffering follows. If it weren't for my personal code of feeding any starving customer, I wouldn't even allow someone like him to set foot OC. Luffy nodded slowly. So in short, they're human trash that should be disposed of as soon as possible. In the next moment before anyone could react, the ocean stirred and a massive crystalline Pac-Man emerged from the water, its shimmering, translucent form reflecting the sunlight like a deadly jewel. With terrifying speed, it surged forward and chomp! Krieg's warship, along with all 300 of his men, was swallowed whole. Before the sheer weight of the crystal construct dragged it beneath the waves in an instant, its dense form sinking like a stone into the abyss. Meanwhile, Krieg stood frozen, his face blank, his body trembling as fear crept up his spine. His fleet, what little remained of it, was gone in an instant. Now, all he had left was a single man in his golden armor. Zeph, who was also watching the scene, felt his face pale. It was one thing to take down 300 people, since he knew of monsters who could take on even greater numbers on their own, but to do that in a single, decisive moment, without even giving opponents a chance to fight back. Even Luffy's crew members weren't any better off. They stood frozen, gaping at the water where the warship had been just moments ago. They had known their captain was strong, of that there had never been any doubt. They had sparred against him, trained under him. They had seen him wield his crystalline abilities with terrifying efficiency. But this was something beyond their expectations, and what he did just now made them look at him with newfound awe and respect in their eyes. Only Uta remained unfazed. She had already seen him massacre the Black Cat pirates. Yet, even for her, watching him dispatch Krieg's men so effortlessly sent a strange warmth through her chest. Her faith in him as their captain had never wavered, and now, it was stronger than ever. That was fun, Luffy declared cheerfully, dusting off his hands before shifting his attention to Krieg. His grin widened as he took a step forward. Now, let's deal with the leader of those pests, too. With a relaxed stride, he began walking toward him. Krieg's face drained of color. His breath hitched as he instinctively took a step back, only to realize there was nowhere left to run. His ship, his last refuge, was now sinking into the abyss. Trapped on the Barati's deck with no means of escape, desperation clawed at him. His gaze darted wildly before landing on the only man still standing by his side. "Jin," Krieg's voice cracked, his usual bravado gone. "Help me, keep that monster away from me." Jin, who had remained still until now, clenched his jaw. His grip tightened around his tonfas as he slowly moved, stepping between Luffy and Krieg. His instincts screamed at him to run, to surrender. Even after witnessing what Luffy had done, he knew better than to believe he could win. But loyalty was a cruel thing. He owed his life to Krieg. No matter how futile it was, he wouldn't abandon his captain, not even if it meant laying down his own life. Luffy, however, didn't slow his approach. He barely even acknowledged Jin as an obstacle. The moment Jin moved to attack, Luffy's foot lashed out, striking his waist with a sharp, effortless, hockey-infused kick. The impact sent Jin crashing into the ship's railing, unconscious before he even hit the ground. Krieg barely had time to process what had happened before Luffy was suddenly right in front of him. His body stiffened. He tried to move, to react, but he was too slow. Luffy's hand shot out, gripping the front of Krieg's golden armor. The metal screeched in protest as Luffy tore off the entire front plate with one brutal yank, exposing Krieg's unprotected torso beneath. Before Krieg could even cry out, a devastating hockey-infused fist slammed into his gut. Krieg doubled over, a strangled grunt of pain escaping his lips as the air was forcibly driven from his lungs. Luffy grinned, his expression deceptively sweet as he grabbed Krieg's head, squeezing slightly while letting his hockey seep into his grip. "Now, be a good boy and tell me what happened to the rest of your fleet." His voice was light, almost playful, but the pressure in his hand spoke volumes. "You will, won't you?" Generally, Luffy wouldn't have cared about whatever happened to Krieg or his crew, but after repeated instances of encountering events that turned his canon knowledge on its head, he decided that even if he had to go out of his way, he would try to gather as much knowledge about the world as he could. Krieg gritted his teeth, sweat rolling down his face as he fought to suppress the shiver crawling up his spine. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't have given in so easily. He would have spat in Luffy's face and found a way to weasel his way out. But right now? Right now, he knew exactly what kind of position he was in. Luffy was no ordinary pirate. This wasn't just another fight. If he wanted to live to see another day, to plot revenge, to rebuild, he had no choice but to comply. "Fine," Krieg spat, his voice laced with frustration and barely concealed fury. "I'll tell you. 2 months ago, we had just entered paradise when we were suddenly ambushed by Baroque Works agents in that damned Whiskey Peak city on Cactus Island." Krieg growled, his fists clenching as rage flickered in his eyes. "At first, we held our own just fine. Those bastards weren't anything special. But then, out of nowhere, a big guy with blades for hands showed up." His voice wavered slightly, and his jaw tightened at the memory. "He took down my entire fleet single-handedly, me, my crew, my ships. He crushed us like we were nothing. After that, he gave me an ultimatum. Join Baroque Works or die. I had no choice but to accept. They made me one of their officers." Luffy's brow furrowed in surprise. "You actually joined Baroque Works?" Then, as if remembering something, he bent down and picked up a piece of Krieg's torn armor. He ran his fingers over the metal, his eyes narrowing slightly when he spotted something engraved on it, Mr. 10. A smirk curled on Luffy's lips as he casually dropped the armor back onto the ground. "Huh. Interesting. But wait. If I remember correctly, don't Baroque Works officers have female partners?" Krieg's face darkened at the question. A shadow passed over his features before he clicked his tongue in frustration. "I did. Miss Tuesday. She was on the ship just now." His voice trailed off as a realization hit him like a ton of bricks. His eyes darted toward the ocean, where his ship had vanished beneath the waves, and his expression twisted into something unreadable. "She's dead now. Thanks to you." For a brief moment, silence hung between them. Then, just as quickly, something else flickered in Krieg's gaze, an idea. His posture straightened and a smirk, forced, but present, spread across his lips. "So, you already know about Baroque Works, huh?" His voice took on a slick, calculating tone. "That means you must know what happens to those who cross them." He leaned forward slightly, attempting to mask the desperation in his voice with false confidence. "You've already killed Miss Tuesday, but if you let me go, I'll do you a favor and keep your name out of my report to the boss. Trust me, kid. You don't want to make an enemy of Baroque Works. More importantly, you don't want to make an enemy of its leader. He's not someone a fledgling pirate like you can afford to piss off." The truth was, Krieg had no idea who the leader of Baroque Works actually was. But he figured anyone with the resources to run an organization and extensive network of that scale had to be powerful. If he played his cards right, maybe, just maybe, he could scare this cocky brat into letting him walk away. For a moment, Luffy just stared at him. Then, his grin widened, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Oh? You're trying to threaten me?" He shook his head in mock disappointment. "Nice try, but it wouldn't have worked. After all." His voice dropped just slightly, his smirk turning sharper. "Only a handful of people know that the Desert King, Sir Crowling the strings behind Baroque Works." The reaction was immediate. Krieg's entire body jerked like he'd been struck by lightning. His eyes nearly bulged out of their sockets. "What?" he barked, his voice raw with disbelief. "How the hell do you know that?" Luffy chuckled. "I have my ways." Krieg stood frozen, his mind reeling as he couldn't comprehend how some no-name kid from the East Blue knew such a massive secret. More importantly, he cursed himself for ever getting tangled up with someone as dangerous as Crocodile. But even with his brain screaming at him, he couldn't afford to back down. He latched onto the only leverage he had left as he straightened and glared at Luffy. "So what if you know? That just makes things easier for me," he sneered. "I have a warlord of the sea backing me. Surely you don't want to make an enemy out of him, do you?" Luffy nodded sagely. "You're right, Crocodile isn't someone you can just mess with." Hope flickered in Krieg's eyes, only to die the next moment when Luffy continued. "But I'm not worried about him." Luffy's grin returned, this time sharper. "I think I can handle him. Besides, I doubt you're important enough for him to risk blowing his cover just to come after me." Before Krieg could even process Luffy's words, the young boy stepped forward, seizing him by the collar. Krieg barely had time to gasp before Luffy lifted him into the air with ease. Like he weighed nothing at all. Then, in one brutal motion, Luffy brought him crashing down across his knee. The next moment a sickening crack echoed through the air as many winced at the sight. Krieg's body convulsed, his mouth opening in a silent scream as sheer, agonizing pain shot through his spine. His vision blurred, his limbs went numb, and for the first time in his life, true terror gripped his heart. His breath hitched and his eyes rolled back before he crumpled to the ground, motionless. Luffy stared down at Krieg's unconscious form, his expression unreadably cold before he exhaled slowly, then dusted off his hands as if wiping away the last remnants of a minor inconvenience. "Well, that takes care of that." With that, he turned away from the fallen pirate and strode toward Zeph, who had been watching in silence. "Old man," Luffy said, stopping before him, "I'm not killing them. You'll need money to rebuild your restaurant, so cash in their bounties, it'll help." His voice was casual, but his tone left no room for argument. "And don't worry about Krieg." Luffy's gaze flicked briefly back to the unconscious man, then back to Zeph. "Unless he gets extensive physical therapy or finds someone with powerful healing abilities like Kaya, his legs are done. He won't be a threat anymore." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "But make sure to keep an eye on that Jin guy. He seems tricky, too loyal for his own good." Luffy didn't wait for a response. He had already said what needed to be said. With that, he brushed past Zeph and addressed his crew, his tone shifting seamlessly into command. "Get the ship ready, we're leaving." "We're not staying for dinner?" Uda asked, a little disappointed. Luffy shook his head. "No, we can't." His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp, focused. "I just realized something. Since the Big Mom pirates showed up, it won't be long before Marines send someone to investigate. Considering Big Mom's status, they won't just send small fries. At the very least, we're looking at a rear admiral or two." He shrugged. "Not that we couldn't handle them, but there's no benefit in fighting them, yet." Uda sighed, nodding in agreement. "You're right. Even if we could take them on, there's no point in letting stray arrows hit us." She studied him for a moment, then smiled knowingly. "Besides, I'm guessing you have something else you want to take care of." Luffy didn't deny it, Instead, he simply nodded before shifting his gaze toward the pink-haired woman sitting nearby, lost in thought. Without hesitation, he strolled over and stopped in front of her, casting a shadow over her slumped form, prompting her to look up at him. "So, Vinsmoke Reiju, what's next for you?" Luffy asked, his voice light-hearted, accompanied by a small chuckle at the confusion flashing across her face. "I mean, what are you going to do now?" Her lips parted slightly as if to answer, but no words came out. Instead, she hesitated, her fingers lightly fidgeting with the hem of her gloves. I don't know," she admitted with a quiet sigh. "I never really thought this far ahead." "Well, in that case, why don't you come with us?" Luffy offered with a smile. "With you?" Reiju blinked, staring at him in surprise. "But why?" Luffy simply shrugged. "Why not? It's not like I planned for the rest of my crew to join me. Uda aside, I met all of them out at sea. Just like you. So again, why not?" Reiju remained silent, contemplating his words. For the first time in a long while, someone was offering her a choice. But after a moment, she shook her head. "I really appreciate your kindness, Luffy. I do. But I can't do that to you." She exhaled deeply. "I bring more trouble to your crew than I'm worth." "Oh, is that so?" Luffy mused, looking thoughtful for a moment. "Well, I won't force you. It's your decision. But I am worried since you won't be able to stay here for long." "What do you mean?" Reiju frowned at his words. "Let's be honest, once the news of the Big Mom pirates' appearance in the East Blue spreads around, the Marines and the world government will try to find any and all ways to save face, since they wouldn't want the world to think that big-name pirates like them can move around freely without any consequences," Luffy explained before looking at Reiju with a comically sad expression on his face. "And when they send someone to investigate this place, they will find you, the princess of the Germa kingdom. They won't pass up this chance to make a scapegoat out of you, as well as gain powerful leverage against your father, Judge." "That won't work," Reiju scoffed, shaking her head. "I doubt my father sees me as a valuable asset, enough for them to use me as leverage against him." Luffy hummed. "Personally, yeah, you're probably right. He doesn't care about you." His voice carried no sympathy, just a matter-of-fact tone. "But publicly? That's a different story." Reiju stilled. "Even if Judge doesn't care about you," Luffy continued, "he can't afford to let the Marines capture you. If he does, it'll be a huge blow to his reputation. Germa is already in a delicate position, with both Big Mom and the world government eyeing its technology, and Judge is doing everything he can to hold on to his power. If he allows them to use his own daughter as a pawn, it'll make him look weak. So, whether he wants to or not, he'll have to play along." Luffy's expression darkened slightly. "But once he gets you back, that's what worries me." Reiju bit her lip, her mind racing. "So," Luffy said, snapping her out of her thoughts, "you've got two options." He held up a finger. 1. You go off on your own, try to find a safe place to hide, and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, hoping your father never finds you. Then he raised another. Or 2. You come with us, get stronger, and when the time comes, he smirked, we'll help you free Sanji from both Judge and Big Mom. Reiju's breath caught slightly at the mention of her brother. Luffy extended a hand toward her. The choice is yours. Damn it. When you put it like that, do you really think I have a choice? Reiju groaned, shooting Luffy a glare. Then her expression softened as she sighed, shaking her head before finally reaching out and placing her hand in his. Fine, she relented, a small smirk tugging at her lips. I'll join your crew. Then, raising a teasing brow, she added, but I warn you. I'm quite the high-maintenance girl, Captain. She winked playfully. Luffy let out a hearty laugh before pulling her up to her feet. In that case, welcome to the crew, Princess. To be continued. The Barati Incident Aftermath. Raphael. System. It had been a day since Luffy and the crew departed from Barati, and today, he had Uda take Reiju under her wing to begin training her in haki and total concentration breathing. A few hours later, Uda reported that Reiju had potential and that the training session had gone well. However, the girl in question had a very different opinion. You're all monsters. Reiju groaned dramatically as she collapsed onto the dining table in the ship's kitchen. I can't feel my limbs, my lungs are on fire, and I think I died at least twice back there, she grumbled, shooting a glare at Luffy as if this were all his fault. Luffy chuckled, unfazed, as he set a glass of water in front of her. Quit whining. You're the one who wanted to get stronger to save your brother, he reminded her, his tone light but firm. Besides, today was just the beginner's routine. Once you get used to this, we'll step it up. Reiju lifted her head just enough to give him a look of sheer betrayal. You mean that wasn't even the hard part? Her horrified expression only made Luffy grin wider, making him smile in pure glee. Nope. She groaned again and let her head drop back onto the table with a soft thud. Anyway, where is everyone? Luffy asked, turning his attention back to the simmering pan on the stove. He added vegetables to the gravy, stirring slowly as the rich aroma filled the room. Uda went to take a bath, Kuina is practicing with her spear, Kai is reading something, and Zoro is still outside training. Reiju mumbled before scowling at the mention of training. Then, her expression shifted as she caught another whiff of whatever Luffy was cooking. Her stomach growled in betrayal. By the way, what is that? It smells amazing, she added, hunger gleaming in her eyes. Luffy glanced at her, amused, before nodding toward a worn-out notebook sitting open on the counter. It's a recipe from Zeph's cookbook, he said. Reiju's brows rose slightly. Zeph actually gave you his cookbook? Yeah, Luffy said, his tone unusually appreciative. He gave it to me as thanks for saving and healing his men. Didn't even hesitate. His fingers lightly tapped the edge of the book, as if acknowledging its value. Honestly, this thing is a goldmine. The way Zeph breaks down measurements and techniques. Even a total amateur like me can make something decent. Reiju smirked. Decent, huh? We'll see about that. Luffy just grinned. You'll be begging for seconds. She rolled her eyes but didn't bother denying it. Her stomach grumbled again. Yeah. Just hurry up. I think I deserve a reward for surviving your version of training hell. Luffy only laughed, turning back to the stove as the scent of the dish grew even stronger. For a moment, a peaceful silence settled between them, broken only by the gentle simmering of the pan and the rich aroma of food filling the air. So, Reiju, can you tell me more about your situation? Luffy finally asked, breaking the quiet. Reiju remained still, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her glass. She stared into the water as if searching for answers before slowly looking up at him. What exactly do you want to know? My main concern is why your brother was abducted now, after all these years of being left alone despite your father knowing exactly where he was, Luffy said as he placed the lid on the pan. What is your father trying to pull when Sanji hasn't even awakened his genetic enhancements yet? What? How do you know about our genetic enhancements? Reiju exclaimed, abruptly standing up, her eyes wide in shock. Luffy, unfazed by her outburst, gestured for her to sit back down. Relax. Breathe first, he said evenly, waiting until she did so before continuing. As for how I know, let's just say I have my ways. He offered her a small, almost apologetic smile. And no, this isn't about trust. My sources aren't something I can explain in simple terms. He reached out and gave her shoulder a light pat, grounding her. Reiju swallowed, still watching him warily, but eventually sat back down. Now, Luffy continued, his voice softer, when I healed you yesterday, I discovered that aside from that tracking chip, you don't have any other enhancements at all. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. Why is that? Judge's eldest daughter. Yet he spared you from the experiments while your brothers weren't? Reiju let out a humorless chuckle, her expression twisting into something bitter. Who said I was spared? Luffy stayed silent, giving her the space to speak at her own pace. She exhaled slowly, her fingers gripping her glass a little tighter. I don't remember much from my early childhood, but I know I was experimented on. My father subjected me to the same modifications as my brothers, but by the time I turned 13, he realized my body didn't support his enhancements as well as Ichiji's or Niji's. I was defective. Her voice wavered, just for a moment before she forced a small, hollow smile. And failure isn't something my father takes lightly. So instead of continuing the genetic modifications, he decided to experiment with cybernetics on me instead. That's when my mother finally gathered the courage to step in. Her smile faded, and her voice turned distant. I don't know how she did it. Maybe she threatened him, or maybe she begged. But somehow, she got him to stop. And after that, she let out a shaky breath. He stopped acknowledging me altogether. To him. I was a reminder of a failed experiment, one not even worth looking at. She fell silent, staring at the table as if seeing something far beyond it. Seeing Reiju's downcast expression, Luffy felt a pang of guilt for bringing up such painful memories. But before he could say anything, Reiju took a deep breath, blinking away the moisture in her eyes. By the time she looked up, her expression was carefully schooled back to normal. "By the way, I don't think your sources are as accurate as you think," Reiju said suddenly as she pushed off the table and walked over to the kitchen counter. She grabbed a nearby spoon, scooped up a bit of gravy, and tasted it. Delicious, she admitted before tilting her head thoughtfully. "But it could use a little more salt," she added, placing the lid back on the pan. Luffy raised an eyebrow. "You were saying something about my sources being inaccurate?" he repeated as he stepped over, grabbing a pinch of salt and sprinkling it into the gravy before giving it a slow stir. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, glancing at her from the corner of his eyes. Leaning against the counter, Reiju folded her arms over her chest. "You said my brother, Sanji, hasn't awakened his genetic enhancements yet, but that's completely false. Not only did he awaken them, but he was also my father's best soldier," she said, clenching her fists, unaware of the astonished yet curious expression on Luffy's face. "Sanji was kind, you know," Reiju went on, her voice softening. A fond, almost sorrowful smile ghosted her lips. "The only one among my brothers who treated me like a sister. The only one who respected our mother." Her gaze turned wistful. "During my father's brutal training sessions, he used to wipe the floor with my other brothers, but he never gloated about it, never took joy in it. He just did what he was ordered to do. And when training was over, he spent the rest of his time with us, or cooking for us. But then, one day, something changed," she murmured. Her arms tightened around herself. "He started acting differently. He smiled less, lost interest in cooking, stopped spending time with me and our mother. At first, we thought it was just exhaustion, or maybe he was growing up, but then, before we even realized it, he stopped smiling entirely. And he stopped cooking too. He became exactly what my father had always wanted, an emotionless, obedient enforcer, until..." "Until?" Luffy prompted. Before he could get an answer, a wave of overwhelming killing intent flooded the room. Luffy immediately tensed. Reiju's rigid, her fists clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She glared at the floor with such intensity it seemed as if she were trying to burn a hole straight through it. The suffocating pressure spread throughout the ship, alerting the rest of the crew. Within moments, the kitchen door burst open as Uta, Kuina, Kaya, and Zoro rushed in. Weapons at the ready. Only to pause in confusion when they saw Luffy and Reiju simply standing there. Luffy met their questioning gazes and, with a subtle look, silently reassured them that everything was fine. A moment passed before the crew hesitated, then reluctantly exited the kitchen, closing the door behind them. As they left, Reiju took a deep breath, the killing intent slowly dissipating. But even as she calmed, there was still a quiet rage simmering in her eyes. "Luffy," she said, her voice tight, "I need to clear my head. We'll talk later." She turned on her heel and headed for the door. "Wait." She paused, glancing back just as Luffy quickly scooped some rice onto a plate, pouring a generous serving of gravy over it. He handed it to her with an easy chuckle. "An empty stomach won't help you cool your mind," he said with a grin. Reiju blinked in surprise before a small, genuine smile crept onto her lips. She accepted the plate, warmth filling her chest, not just from the food, but from the unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she murmured before leaving the kitchen, her steps feeling just a little lighter. As the door shut behind her, Luffy leaned against the counter and let out a heavy sigh. "Oh boy," he muttered to himself as the rest of the crew poured back into the kitchen for lunch. "This world is a fucking mess." Meanwhile, as Luffy and his crew enjoyed their lunch, a marine warship was docked near the Barati. "Wow, this place is a mess," Rear Admiral Iron Fist Kobe whistled as he surveyed the wreckage of the once pristine floating restaurant. "Thank you for pointing out the obvious," Zeph scoffed, arms crossed over his chest. "Perhaps you'd like to tell me the sea is blue next? That might really enlighten me," he added dryly. Kobe smirked. "Nah, I'll keep those kinds of clever observations to myself," he shot back before his expression turned serious. "Now, enough with the small talk. Tell me what happened here." Zeph raised a bushy eyebrow. What's there to tell? Some bastards from the Big Mom Pirates came to dine at my restaurant. One of my chefs said something rude, and they didn't take kindly to it. Next thing we knew, this mess happened, he said with an easy shrug, smoothly weaving a half-truth without hesitation. Kobe didn't look convinced. He let out a slow sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose. That's it? He arched a brow. Come on, Zeph. We both know there's more to the story. We can't help you if you don't tell us the truth. For a moment, there was silence. Then, unexpectedly, Zeph let out a deep, hearty laugh, catching everyone's attention. Help me, he barked, shaking his head in amusement. You've got quite the sense of humor, young Marine. His tone turned mocking, his piercing gaze locking onto Kobe. Say those words when they mean something. Because we both know you don't have the power or authority to make the Big Mom Pirates pay for their actions. So spare me the platitudes and get this over with. Behind Kobe, Rear Admiral Kujaku, who had been watching the exchange with an increasingly impatient expression, finally decided she had heard enough. Or, she cut in sharply, stepping forward, we could charge you with non-cooperation and reopen your and your crew's bounties. How does that sound? She leveled a sharp glare at Zeph. Just because you stopped being a pirate doesn't erase your past sins. In fact, you should be grateful that we've left you alone all these years. It's only because we don't have the manpower to waste on old fossils like you. A heavy silence hung in the air. Then Zeph let out a low chuckle. You think I'm scared of some bounty placed by you Marines? He shook his head, his smirk widening. You're 50 years too young to be threatening a man like me, girl. His tone was light, almost amused. But his eyes carried the weight of decades of experience as he assessed and immediately dismissed Kujaku. Kujaku's eye twitched. Is that so? She growled, her fingers curling into fists. Let's test that, shall we? She spun on her heel, fully prepared to storm back to the warship and issue an order, but before she could take a single step, Kobe grabbed her arm. Kujaku, stop. His voice was firm. His grip just tight enough to hold her in place. She turned to him with a scowl, but Kobe didn't back down. We're not here to harass them, he said, his eyes narrowing. They're the victims here. He sighed and released her arm. Do me a favor and calm down. Let me handle this. For a long moment, Kujaku glared at him, jaw clenched. Then she scoffed and yanked her arm away. Fine, she snapped before stomping back toward the warship, her coat billowing behind her. Kobe exhaled, shaking his head. Sorry about that. She can be a little prickly, but she's a good person with a strong sense of justice, he said, attempting to salvage his partner's reputation. But judging by Zeph's unimpressed expression, Kobe could tell it was a lost cause. Deciding not to push it, he moved on to the next topic. Anyway, what's the deal with these guys? Kobe asked, gesturing toward Don Krieg. The former pirate captain sat motionless, slumped against a broken pillar, his once proud posture replaced with a hollow, vacant stare. His eyes were dull, as if all the fight had drained from him, and he made no effort to move, no struggle, no defiance, not even a flicker of recognition as the conversation unfolded around him, not even attempting to flee despite being completely unrestrained. Beside him, Jin was in stark contrast. He sat bound head to toe, his wrists and ankles tied so tightly that the ropes dug into his skin. A thick cloth gag covered his mouth while his head was bowed, fists clenched, and his entire body radiated frustration and humiliation. Kobe quirked a brow at the sight, amused by the irony. Krieg, the so-called invincible admiral, was broken beyond repair, while his once loyal right-hand man seethed in silence, still refusing to submit. Holding back any sarcastic remark, Kobe turned back to Zeph for an explanation. Oh, these fools? Zeph scoffed, barely sparing Krieg and Jin a glance. His disdain was evident, as if he were looking at nothing more than trash. Showed up right after those Big Mom bastards left. Figured we were weak since we couldn't defend the restaurant. Thought they could just waltz in and take over. He snorted. Too bad for them. I had some unexpected help from a Straw Hat boy who put them in their place. Left them here so I could cash in on their bounties. At the mention of Straw Hat, Kobe's eyes lit up. Straw Hat boy, huh? He tried to sound casual, but there was no hiding his interest. So he helped you? Yeah, Zeph admitted, his voice carrying a rare note of gratitude. He healed my men and protected my restaurant. Oh, Kobe's intrigue deepened, his lips quirking into a small smile. Do tell me more. Zeph frowned, noticing the Marine's keen interest in Luffy. It put him on edge, but he answered anyway, keeping his tone neutral. He briefly recounted how Luffy had arrived, fought off Krieg and his men, and tended to the injured chefs. Of course, Zeph left out the important details. He didn't mention Sanji's abduction, Reiju's involvement, Kaya's healing abilities, or Baroque Works' connection to Krieg. He was an old pirate, after all. He knew better than to give the Marines anything they didn't need to know. Meanwhile, Kobe listened intently, pleased by Luffy's actions. It only reinforced his belief that Luffy, despite being on the wrong path, was still a man of justice, someone who helped people when they needed it. Of course, Kobe wasn't naive. He could tell there were gaps in Zeph's account. But pressing the old man wouldn't get him anywhere unless he wants, which he had no intention of doing. Well then, Zeph, he said, stretching out a hand, thanks for the hospitality. Zeph simply stared at the offered handshake. After a moment of awkward silence, Kobe sighed and retracted his hand, muttering something about stubborn old men. Under his breath, he waved to his subordinates. Get them on the ship. The Marines moved in, hoisting Krieg up like a lifeless puppet while two others struggled to lift a thrashing Jin. Even bound, Jin fought them, growling against his gag, but the Marines had no patience for his antics. A sharp blow to the gut sent him doubling over, and after that, he was hauled onto the ship without further trouble. Before leaving, Kobe turned back to Zeph. We'll make sure you get your bounty payout, you have my word. Zeph scoffed but didn't argue. He simply watched as the Marine vessel pulled away from the dock, the warship's imposing frame growing smaller as it sailed off toward the horizon. Once they were nothing but a dot in the distance, Zeph exhaled through his nose and turned back toward the ruined restaurant. Fucking morons, he muttered before trudging inside. There was still a hell of a lot of work to do. Well, the infamous pirate of the East Blue, Don Krieg, Kobe mused as he settled into a chair in front of the cell where Krieg and Jin were being held. Since fate has seen fit to land you in my custody, why don't you tell me about that little skirmish you had with Baroque Works? He said and noticed Jin's body tensed. But Krieg remained disturbingly still, staring blankly ahead, as if he hadn't even heard Kobe speak. Kobe tapped a finger against the arm of his chair, studying them both before continuing. My sources say it was a brutal battle, and yet, it ended abruptly. And what's more surprising? You were the one who backed off, Krieg. He leaned forward slightly, watching for the smallest flicker of reaction. That doesn't quite add up, does it? His voice dropped just enough to sound almost amused. So, be good prisoners and fill me in. What exactly happened? Silence stretched between them. Kobe waited, giving them a chance to speak, but neither Krieg nor Jin so much as twitched. With a sigh, he was about to press further when the sharp sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the brig. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, already knowing who it was before she even spoke. What the hell was that? Kujaku snapped, coming to a stop beside him, arms crossed and fury written all over her face. Kobe glanced up, meeting her glare with a tired expression. How dare you tell me to back off in front of a damn pirate? She continued, her voice rising with every word. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? Pinching the bridge of his nose, Kobe exhaled slowly. Look, I'm sorry. Maybe I overreacted a little, he admitted, keeping his voice calm, but you were about to escalate things unnecessarily. Kujaku scoffed, flicking her hair back with a sharp motion. Escalate things? Zeph is a pirate. That old fossil deserves whatever's coming to him. Zeph was the victim here, Kobe countered, his patience thinning. He didn't attack the Big Mom pirates. His restaurant got wrecked because some idiots picked a fight with the wrong people. There was no reason for you to start throwing threats around. Victim, my ass, Kujaku muttered, rolling her eyes. Just pirates hurting pirates. I don't see the loss. Kobe sighed, rubbing his temples. You know, Kujaku, sometimes I wonder if you working under Admiral Akainu was such a great idea. At least he's efficient and gets things done. Kujaku shot back, lifting her chin and flicking her hair sassily. Kobe let out another sigh, deciding there was no point in arguing further. Instead, he shifted the conversation. Anyway, did you know Luffy was involved in this mess too? His voice lightened with interest. Zeph told me about what happened. How Luffy fought off Krieg and even helped the restaurant staff. I told you. He's quite the hero, just like his grandfather. Yeah, like hell he is. The sudden outburst snapped both Kobe and Kujaku's attention to Jin, who had been silent until now. The venom in his voice was unmistakable, his glare burning with raw hatred. Kobe blinked, then arched a brow. Oh, so you do have a mouth, he said dryly. Kujaku, now intrigued, grabbed a chair and spun it around, straddling it as she rested her arms on the backrest. Please, do tell, she said with a smirk. What exactly do you mean by, he's a monster? Jin's glare darkened as he recounted what he had witnessed, the sheer horror of Luffy single-handedly slaughtering 300 people in one single move before paralyzing Krieg for life, leaving him as nothing more than a broken shell of his former self. By the time they stepped onto the deck, the air between them felt heavier than before. Kujaku, who had initially been intrigued by Jin's story, now looked serious, her brows furrowed in deep thought. The wind tugged at her coat as she turned to Kobe, eyes sharp with scrutiny. Kobe, are you seriously still holding out hope for that boy after everything we just heard? Kobe shrugged, offering an easy grin. I mean, he was protecting people, so that's gotta count for something, right? His smile widened. Besides, think about it. If I can pull this off, we'd have someone with admiral-level potential who wouldn't even need to be trained from scratch. Tell me that doesn't sound awesome. Kujaku folded her arms, unimpressed. Sure, in theory. But from everything I've heard, that kid is too reckless and unpredictable to be a Marine. She gave him a pointed look. He doesn't sound like someone who will follow orders without asking questions. Kobe chuckled. Well, not surprising, considering who his grandfather is. He glanced at her with amusement, and after a beat, Kujaku smirked as well. And come on. Even we try to twist the orders to find any and all loopholes for our convenience. Yes, we do bend orders, Kobe. We find loopholes, sure, but we always see the mission through, even if it means going against our own conscience. Kujaku's voice turned steely. One of the things Admiral Akainu drilled into me is that a soldier who can't follow orders is as good as dead. For a moment, Kobe said nothing. His gaze drifted toward the open sea, watching the waves rise and fall in a steady rhythm. Yeah, you are right, some things are more important than morals and conscience. Sometimes, following the orders blindly is a must and relatively a right thing to do, he said, as memories of past flashed through his mind, decisions he'd made, orders he'd carried out, the weight of lives forever changed by his choices. Some things he couldn't take back. Some things he wouldn't take back. And yet, he shook his head, forcing a small smile as he turned back to Kujaku. Still, he said, his voice lighter, more determined, I have to try. I want to try. Kujaku studied him for a long moment before exhaling softly. I won't stop you, she said, her tone almost gentle. For a brief second, she sounded less like a rear admiral and more like a friend. But then her expression hardened, her stance shifting back to one of authority. But know this, if you fail to bring him to our side, we will have to find a way to arrest or eliminate him. Because if we don't, she narrowed her eyes. I have a gut feeling he'll become a huge problem for the Marines. Kobe didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly clenched his fist, the metal of his coated knuckles gleaming in the sunlight. Fine, he said quietly, meeting her gaze head-on. If push comes to shove, his eyes steeled with resolve. I'll do it myself. To be continued. New target acquired. Raphael. System. Back on the Going Merry, after finishing lunch, the crew scattered across the ship, each tending to their own tasks. Meanwhile, Luffy, having already completed his duties for the morning, retreated to the captain's cabin. Once inside, he plopped down onto his bed and grinned in anticipation as he decided to check the haul he had received after the whole ordeal with Don Krieg. Alright, let's see what we got this time, he said excitedly as he opened his system interface. To his surprise, 2 new titles and 2 achievements appeared in his notifications. Without wasting a second, he focused on the titles first. Certified Slayer. This title is evolved from Certified Killer, and is given to the individual who has taken 500 or more than 500 lives. Reward. Randomizer Roll X2. Luffy let out a sigh as he read the first title. It was yet another reminder of a side of himself he had reluctantly accepted. He had come to terms with it, but at times, he couldn't help but wonder, Were the laws of this world affecting his mental state? Was that why it felt easier to process all the lives he had taken so far? After all, he wasn't reincarnated into this world like some other isekai protagonists with his own will. He had been a transmigrator into this world, born inside the body of one of its inhabitants, merging his soul with them, making him more susceptible to the influence of the laws of this world. Notice. Based on my analysis, Master's deduction may not be far from the truth. Raphael's voice echoed in his mind. It is merely a hypothesis, but there is a high probability that, due to the world's high mortality rate, its laws prioritize survival over morality in its inhabitants. Huh. That actually makes a lot of sense, Luffy mused, rubbing the back of his head, before shaking his head and shifting his focus. Another interesting detail had caught his eye. Looks like achievements can evolve too. Maybe they'll gain additional effects in the future. Yeah, that'd be nice, he muttered before moving on to the next title. A fledgling captain. This title is given to an individual who has successfully managed to recruit 5 people in their crew. Reward. Randomizer roll x2. Luffy frowned, staring at the title. Is the system calling me a baby bird? That's just rude, he muttered, crossing his arms. Sure, he was still new to this whole captain thing, and rarely gave out orders like a real captain, but did they really have to phrase it like that? Shaking his head, he moved on and opened the Achievements tab. Tyrannical Takedown. This achievement is given to an individual who has defeated a cruel and oppressive pirate Don Krieg. Reward. Randomizer roll x1. Princess aboard. This achievement is given to an individual who has successfully managed to recruit a princess of a nation to their crew. Reward. Randomizer roll x1. Luffy absent-mindedly picked up a pencil from the desk, chewing on the end as he skimmed through the descriptions. The achievement for taking down Krieg was expected, I guess, he mused, twirling the pencil between his fingers. But getting an achievement just for recruiting Reiju, now that's a sweet bonus. Without wasting any time, Luffy moved on to claiming his rewards. He rolled all 6 times, watching as the system processed his spins. When the results came in, he let out a sigh. 3 of the items were completely useless, 3 sets of ordinary playing cards, a set of generic shuriken from Naruto, and Hawk's sunglasses from My Hero Academia. Really? Who even decides these rewards? He muttered, picking up one of the playing cards and flipping it between his fingers. At least give me something fun, like Gambit's magic cards or something. Still, his disappointment was short-lived. The other 3 rolls turned out to be far more interesting. Congratulations! Rachel Roth, aka Raven's Cloak, has been received. Luffy's eyes widened in excitement. No way! He grinned as he immediately retrieved the item. A dark purple cloak materialized in his hands, its fabric soft yet incredibly durable. A large, crimson jewel clasp held it together, reminiscent of a brooch. But what stood out the most was the aura surrounding it, a faint, eerie energy that felt heavy, almost suppressive. As he ran his fingers over the smooth fabric, he turned to Raphael. Hey, can you analyze this for any extra effects? A moment later, information appeared in his head, displaying the results. Raven's Cloak. The Raven's Cloak is an artifact from the world of DC Comics, belonging to the individual named Rachel Roth, aka Raven. Effects. Unbreaking 3. Greatly enhances durability, preventing damage even under extreme conditions. Detection Warding. When worn, this cloak makes the user significantly harder to detect or notice, should they wish to remain unseen. In normal circumstances, once activated, others will completely overlook the user, no matter how much they might stand out. However, the effectiveness may vary depending on the perception or detection skills of those nearby. Luffy whistled, thoroughly impressed. A detection warding cloak, huh? That could be real useful. I know exactly who on the crew could make the most out of this, he mused, admiring the garment one last time before storing it in his inventory. Still riding the high of his luck, he eagerly moved on to check the next item. Congratulations! Symbiote Suit, non-battle variant, has been received. Luffy's eyes widened, and a huge grin spread across his face. Symbiote Suit, he exclaimed, practically vibrating with excitement as he hurriedly retrieved the item from his inventory. A sleek silver bracelet materialized in his palm, its surface cooled to the touch. Inside, a viscous, inky black liquid swirled restlessly, shifting and pulsating as if alive. Despite his enthusiasm, Luffy wasn't reckless enough to just slap it on without knowing exactly what it could do. Raphael, analyze it and tell me, is it safe to wear? Symbiote suit. Non-battle variant. This silver bracelet contains an egoless, consciousness-free symbiote. Once bonded with a host, it acts as an extension of the user's mind, transforming into any attire the wearer desires. This symbiote does not share the usual weaknesses of its species. However, in exchange, it has lost all combat and adaptive abilities, making it purely a form of clothing that provides decent protection to its host. A small pause, then Raphael's voice echoed in his mind. Notice. After thoroughly analyzing the bracelet and the symbiote within, I can assure you with certainty that there is no risk in master bonding with it. Luffy exhaled in relief. That's good to know. He had no interest in suddenly turning into a rampaging, mind-controlled monster. But then, a thought struck him. His grin returned, this time filled with curiosity. Wait a minute, Raphael. Could you integrate this symbiote into my body? Like, restructure me so I can function like the symbiote itself? A brief silence. Negative. Master's body is not compatible with external modifications. Forcing such an alteration would most likely result in Master transforming into an abomination. Luffy blinked. Yeah, let's not do that. When Raphael warned him about something, he knew better than to argue. Some ideas just weren't worth the risk. Shaking off the thought, he turned his attention back to the bracelet, eager to test it out. Alright, let's see what this symbiote suit can really do. Slipping the silver band onto his wrist, he felt a strange sensation as the black, gooey liquid oozed out and rapidly spread across his body. It moved unnaturally fast, coating him from head to toe in mere seconds. For a brief moment, he was completely encased in the symbiote. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it retracted back into the bracelet, leaving him in his original clothes. Luffy stared at the bracelet, then flexed his fingers. Well, that was an experience, he muttered before deciding to take things a step further. Closing his eyes, in his mind. Almost instantly, his usual red vest and blue shorts vanished, replaced by a crisp white dress shirt, a fitted black vest, and neatly pressed black pants. His messy hair was suddenly styled into a more refined look, completing the elegant transformation. His eyes widened in delight. Whoa! This is amazing. This is gonna save me so much time and money. What followed was an embarrassingly long session of Luffy experimenting with different outfits. Some were stylish, others were absolutely ridiculous. A full samurai armor set, a pirate captain's coat twice his size, a superhero spandex suit, and even a giant mascot costume shaped like a banana. Eventually, after laughing at his own nonsense for far too long, he settled on something both practical and fitting to his taste. A deep red leather jacket, worn and slightly weathered, layered over a faded gray t-shirt. His dark brown cargo pants were tucked into tall, black military-style boots with heavy, metallic soles, giving the whole ensemble a rugged, battle-ready feel. He admired his reflection in the cabin's small mirror, turning slightly to get a better look. Yeah, this is perfect. With his new outfit set, Luffy turned his attention to the final item he had received from the system, and immediately his eyes lit up as he read the description. Oh, a custom devil fruit. And the model is pretty amazing too, he said, a grin stretching across his face. But as Raphael began explaining its abilities in detail, that grin only grew wider. Damn. This one's seriously good, he muttered, flipping the fruit in his hand. Its swirling patterns and unnatural shades of blue colors made it look as mysterious as ever, but what really intrigued him was its potential. For a brief moment, he considered eating it himself, but after a few seconds of thought, he shook his head. Man, as cool as this is, it doesn't really fit my combat style, he admitted, tossing the fruit into the air and catching it absent-mindedly. I could probably make it work, but someone else could put it to way better use. His mind immediately went to his crew, or rather, potential crew members. Udo was a strong contender, but he wasn't entirely sure if she was the perfect fit for this ability. I should wait and see if someone else matches what I have in mind, he mused, twirling the fruit once more before storing it safely in his inventory. With that decision made, he stretched, rolling his shoulders before hopping to his feet. He had rested enough. Time to get moving. Pushing open the cabin door, he stepped out onto the deck and began looking for a certain crew member of his. "There you are," Luffy said as he spotted Kaya sitting on the upper floor of the ship, completely engrossed in a book. He grinned and strolled over. "Just the person I was looking for." Kaya looked up from her book, her lips curving into a warm smile. "Hey, Luffy. Do you need something?" As her gaze settled on him, her expression shifted to mild surprise. "Wow, you look really nice. I didn't know you had something like that in your wardrobe." Luffy chuckled, tugging at the sleeve of his sleek new outfit. "Thanks, I just got it from my devil fruit," he said proudly. Then, without missing a beat, he reached into his inventory. "And nope, I don't need anything. Actually, I have a gift for you." Kaya blinked in surprise as he pulled out a dark purple cloak, held together by a large crimson jewel clasp. "Here, this is for you. It'll help hide your wings and make it easier to stay unnoticed during battles. Since you're our healer, keeping you safe means the rest of us stay alive longer too." Her eyes widened slightly before softening with appreciation. "Oh, thank you, Luffy." She took the cloak from his hands, running her fingers over its smooth yet sturdy fabric. "I was actually thinking about getting something like this myself." She knew her wings tended to draw unwanted attention, and as Luffy had pointed out, that wasn't exactly ideal for the crew's medic. So if this cloak could help conceal her, it would be invaluable. Without hesitation, Kaya draped the cloak over her shoulders and fastened the jewel clasp around her neck. The moment it clicked into place, a subtle shift in the air surrounded her, as though the cloak itself was acknowledging its new master. A quiet hum of energy settled around her, instinctively conveying its abilities. Curious, she pulled the hood up. The moment she did, shadows cascaded down over the upper half of her face, leaving only her brilliant blue eyes visible beneath the veil of darkness. Luffy's jaw dropped slightly. "Whoa, that looks awesome," he said, eyes practically sparkling with excitement. Seeing her like this, it was impossible not to be reminded of why he'd always thought Raven's design was so cool. Then, an idea struck him. Without hesitation, he reached into his inventory and pulled out his phone. "Alright, we need a picture of this. Come on, pose with me." Kaya tilted her head curiously. "What's that?" she asked, eyeing the small box-like device in his hands. It's a phone. Another one of the things I got from my devil fruit," Luffy answered smoothly, with a straight-faced lie. Honestly, at this point, he had long since given up on hiding his phone from his crew, or anyone else who happened to see it. Not that it mattered. With enchantments like unbreaking, protection, and loyalty, no one could steal or destroy it anyway. Of course, he wasn't about to show them the One Piece manga or let them access the internet, but taking pictures, that was fair game. "Just stand next to me and pose like it's a normal picture," he instructed, positioning himself beside her. Kaya, still unsure about the whole thing, hesitated for a moment before giving a small smile and holding up two peace signs. Luffy grinned and snapped the selfie. A second later, he turned the screen toward her. Kaya's eyes widened as she stared at the image, wonder flashing across her face. "That's amazing," she breathed. Then, excitement overtook her curiosity, and she immediately began bombarding him with questions. Luffy chuckled, already expecting this reaction. He had a feeling he'd be stuck answering her questions for a while. As they chatted, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from the stairway below. Luffy's ears perked up, and with a quick use of his observation haki, he identified the person approaching and a mischievous glint sparked in his eyes. "Kaya, you know how to activate the cloak's detection warding ability, right?" he asked, turning to her with a sly grin. "Yeah, I do," Kaya nodded, though she couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at his sudden excitement. "I just have to will it on or off." "Great. Activate it now, and don't turn it off until I give you the signal," Luffy said, urging her to hurry. Kaya blinked before realization dawned on her. She sighed, shaking her head at his childish antics, but still complied. The moment the cloak's ability activated, she became nearly undetectable. Even Luffy, who had asked her to use it, had trouble sensing her presence. Just then, Reiju stepped onto the upper deck. "Hey, Luffy and," she began, but stopped abruptly. She frowned, scanning the area. "Wait, you're alone?" I swear I heard you talking to someone just now. Really? Luffy said, tilting his head with exaggerated confusion. But as you can see, it's just me. All alone. With my lonely self, he added dramatically, clutching his chest as if overcome with sorrow. Reiju gave him a deadpan look. You are not funny, she folded her arms, narrowing her eyes. And I know I heard someone else. My ears didn't just betray me. Luffy fought to keep a straight face. Maybe it's the wind whispering secrets to you, he said, barely holding back a smirk. Reiju sighed, clearly unimpressed. Whatever, I don't have time for your nonsense. Okay, don't get all worked up. I actually have a gift for you, Luffy said, pulling a ring off his finger and tossing it to her. Out of reflex, Reiju caught it, her brows furrowing as she examined the old yet elegant ring, adoring gemstone. What is this? She asked, turning it between her fingers. Then, her lips curled into a smirk. Are you seriously proposing to me? We've barely known each other for a week. Luffy's expression went completely deadpan. Proposing to you? Please, I have standards. Reiju's smirk twitched, her eye giving the faintest of twitches. Excuse me? He grinned, thoroughly enjoying the reaction. Relax, I'm kidding. The ring increases your stamina recovery speed. You should wear it, it'll help you recover faster after training sessions. When Luffy had first received the ring from the system, he had been excited. His Petrosapien abilities heavily relied on stamina, making the ring's effects useful. But after months of training, increasing his stamina reserves, and fighting multiple battles with his crystalline powers, the boost it provided had become negligible. The ring still had its uses, but he figured Reiju would benefit from it far more than he would. Reiju slipped the ring onto her finger, and almost instantly, a refreshing sensation coursed through her body, washing away the lingering fatigue from her earlier training. She flexed her hand, watching the way the gemstone gleamed under the sunlight. Oh, not bad, she mused, and it doesn't look half bad either. Luffy grinned. See, now you have fashion and function. Reiju smirked, giving him a sideways glance. Guess I'll let you off the hook for that standards comment, for now. Luffy chuckled while his observation haki alerted him to another presence approaching. Moments later, Uta strolled onto the deck, her sharp eyes immediately landing on the ring adorning Reiju's hand. She raised an eyebrow. You're giving out gifts now? Where's mine? She held out her hand expectantly, wiggling her fingers. Luffy grinned and reached into his pocket. Here, you might like this, he said, holding out a half-eaten piece of gum. Uta's expression went flat. Without missing a beat, she snatched the gum and immediately hurled it back at him. Luffy ducked, laughing. Ah, come on, that's good gum. I even saved half of it for you. Uta rolled her eyes before giving him a scrutinizing once-over. By the way, what's up with your clothes? She asked, crossing her arms. Didn't know you had fashion sense, or, you know, a sense of anything, really. Hey, I do have fashion sense. Luffy shot back, puffing out his chest. Uta scoffed. Buddy, up until this morning, your entire wardrobe consisted of a red shirt and blue shorts. Yeah, because we had so many clothing options back home, right? Luffy retorted with an eye roll. Then, his lips curled into a mischievous grin. And do you really want me to start talking about all those bright-colored dresses you used to wear back at home? Uta's eyes widened ever so slightly before she quickly cut him off. Anyway, she said hastily, waving a hand as if physically pushing the topic aside. Where's Kaya? I've been looking for her, but I can't find her anywhere. Luffy grinned, stretching his arms behind his head. Oh, Kaya? Well, his grin widened. A full, shameless, shit-eating grin. She's been here the whole time. Reiju's eyes snapped open wide as she frantically scanned the deck. Uta, not missing a beat, activated her observation haki, her brows furrowing. Wait, she muttered, shifting her gaze around. There's definitely a fourth person here, but I can't pinpoint their location. Kaya, meanwhile, had quietly maneuvered behind Reiju, staying completely unnoticed. Then, without warning, she deactivated her ability and leaned in close. Hey, she whispered right into Reiju's ear. Ah. Reiju yelled, nearly jumping out of her skin as her arms flailed wildly in panic. Luffy immediately burst into laughter, doubling over as he clutched his stomach. Oh my god. Your face, he wheezed, pointing at her. Reiju, still catching her breath, quickly turned her glare on Kaya, who looked entirely too pleased with herself. Then, shifting her burning, embarrassed fury, she locked onto Luffy. "You," she growled, eyes ablaze with vengeance. Luffy only laughed harder. With a frustrated yell, Reiju lunged at him, launching into a full-blown chase around the ship. Uda watched the chaos unfold, shaking her head with an amused smirk. Kaya, meanwhile, simply sighed, adjusting her cloak. "It does feel nice to play pranks, friends," she muttered to herself. A week had passed since Luffy's prank on Reiju, and the Going Merry was sailing smoothly under the morning sun in the kitchen. Luffy was flipping pancakes when the door suddenly burst open with a bang. Uda stormed in, clutching a rolled-up map they had stolen from Shellstown's marine branch. "Luffy, as captain, I need your opinion on this," she declared, slamming the map onto the table. Luffy, unfazed, turned off the stove and wiped his hands with a napkin. "What's up?" he asked, strolling over with a curious tilt of his head. "Look, we're approximately here right now," Uda said, flattening the map and jabbing a finger at a specific spot in the sea. "And this is the island I'm interested in," she added, her finger moving to a nearby island marked 16th branch. "I think we should hit this place." Luffy leaned in, eyes scanning the map. "Why this one?" "It's isolated," Uda explained. "If we hit them fast enough, reinforcements won't have time to show up. Plus, if we pull off a successful heist, it'll give us a solid boost to our supplies. Win-win, right?" Luffy hummed, considering her words. We could, I guess." His brows suddenly furrowed as something clicked in his mind. "Wait, did you say 16th branch?" His gaze snapped back to the map, his finger tracing over the name as a memory surfaced. Then, his eyes widened in realization as he remembered who the captain of that branch was. "That settles it," Luffy declared, his grin stretching from ear to ear. "Uda, go tell everyone to get ready," he declared with a wide grin. "In 2 hours, we're raiding the 16th branch base, to be continued."